Hello learners, I am Sudeshna Chaudhary, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Icon Commerce College. Under the course of Social and Political Philosophy, I am discussing the Unit 11, that is Marxism, Alienation and Class Struggle. In the last two videos, we have discussed on what do we understand by Marxism and Marx's concept of alienation. In today's video, we will have a detailed discussion on Marx's notion of class struggle. Marx's view of class is fundamentally tied to economic relations and the distribution of power in society. For Marx, a class is not just a group of people with similar economic conditions, but a group defined by its role in the production process and its relationship to the means of production. Classes are dynamic and are defined in terms of the conflict between those who control the production process and those who do not. This relationship creates a division of society into exploiting and exploited groups. In Marxist theory, class struggle is central to understanding the dynamics of society and the historical change. Marx begins with the assertion in the Communist Manifesto that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. This means that throughout history, every society has been divided into different classes that have opposing interests. These conflicts are the driving force behind social and political change. For example, in feudal society, the struggle was between the lords and the serfs, and in capitalist society, it is between the bourgeois, that is the owners of the means of production, and the proletariat, that is the workers who sell their labor. According to Marx, every society has a mode of production, which includes the means of production, that is the factories, land, technology, etc., and the relations of production, that is how people interact in the production process. The mode of production defines the economic structure of society, and the conflicts between those who control the means of production and those who do not is the core of class struggle. In Marx's theory, the capitalist society is characterized by two main classes. One is the bourgeois, that is the capitalist class. The bourgeois is the class that owns the means of production, that is the factories, land and capital. They control the resources necessary for production and have the economic power to influence society and politics. Their goal is to maximize profits, and it often leads to exploitation of workers. They always try to maximize profits, and for that the workers are being exploited. Some of the key characteristics of the bourgeois class are like the ownership of means of production. The bourgeois' primary distinguishing feature is that they own the capital, that is the factories, the machines, the infrastructure, etc., which is necessary for production. And they do not have to sell their labor because they derive their income from the ownership of capital. They own the capital, so they do not have to sell their own labor. Secondly, another characteristic of the bourgeois class is profit motive. The main goal of the bourgeois is to maximize profit through the exploitation of the proletariat. And this is achieved by paying workers less than the value they produce, with the difference being appropriated as surplus value. The difference here is what? The amount of work the labor do. They do not get the amount for that. They get a less amount. So the surplus value they do not get. Okay. So another characteristics of this class is control over state and ideology. The bourgeois, they not only controls the economy but also has a significant influence over political and ideological systems. They use the state to protect their property and wealth, while ideologies like individualism, liberty are promoted to justify the capitalist system. Another characteristic of the bourgeois class is global influence. In the modern era, the bourgeois operates on a global scale. Capitalism has become an international system with capitalists seeking profits from global markets, often at the expense of workers in less developed nations. This class has the power to shape international policies, economics, and labor practices. Now let us come to the next class, that is the proletariat class, which is the working class, the labor class. The proletariat is the class that does not own the means of production and must sell their labor to survive. They work for wages and are subject to exploitation by the bourgeois. According to Marx, the proletariat's labor is the source of all value in the capitalist system. But they receive less in wages than what they produce. And this creates surplus value, which the bourgeois appropriates as profit. Now, some of the key characteristics of this class, that is the proletariat class, is first is the labor power. The proletariat's primary asset is its labor, which is sold to capitalists in exchange for wages. Workers are paid less than the value of their labor, with the surplus value being taken by the bourgeois as profit. And as a result, workers live under conditions of economic dependence and exploitation. The second characteristic of this proletariat class is alienation. We have discussed about this concept in details in our last video, but still as a characteristic of this proletariat class, we will again have a short discussion on it. So in Marxist terms, workers experience alienation because they are disconnected from the products of their labor, the process of production, and their fellow workers. Work becomes a means of survival rather than self-fulfillment, and workers are treated as commodities whose value is determined by the labor market. Another characteristic of this proletariat class is class consciousness. The proletariat can potentially develop class consciousness, that is, the awareness that their interests are opposed to those of the bourgeois. This realization can lead to solidarity among workers and the desire to revolt against the capitalist system. Another characteristic of this proletariat class is revolutionary potential. According to Marx, the proletariat is the revolutionary class that has the potential to overthrow capitalism. As the working class becomes more aware of its exploitation, it may organize politically to challenge the bourgeois and replace capitalism with socialism. In capitalist societies, the class struggle is driven by exploitation. The proletariat is exploited because they produce goods and services that are worth more than the wages they receive. The difference between the value of what the worker produces and the wages they are paid is called the surplus value, which we have discussed recently within the characteristics of both the classes. and it is the source of profit for the bourgeois, as told already. So this exploitation also leads to alienation, where our workers become estranged from the products of their labor, the process of work itself, and from their fellow workers. And as discussed in our last video, this alienation, because of this alienation, the workers, they no longer see the results of their labor as their own, but as commodities that belong to the bourgeois. So alienation, according to Marx, contributes to the workers' dissatisfaction and awareness of their opposition. This struggle is not just a matter of economic inequality, but is also political and ideological. The ruling class in each historical period, as we see, controls not only the economy but also the political system, the legal system, and the dominant ideas of the society, which serve to legitimize their power. And this is known as ideological hegemony. Marx believed that the contradictions inherent in capitalism would eventually lead to its downfall. As the proletariat class becomes more aware of their exploitation, they will develop a class consciousness, which is a part of its characteristics as just discussed, and they will begin to organize politically among them. And this awareness would lead to a revolution. This revolution happens through a dialectical process, which means that history is driven by contradictions between opposing forces. In the case of capitalism, the contradiction lies between the bourgeois, who controls the means of production, and the proletariat, who are exploited for their labor. Marx's theory of dialectical materialism is a way of understanding history and society as shaped by material, that is, the economic forces and the conflicts between them. According to Marx, the development of society is driven by changes in the mode of production, that is, the way goods and services are being produced, and which in turn determines the social structure, the political system, and ideologies. In a capitalist society, the mode of production is based on private ownership of the means of production, and the key class distinction is between those who own the means of production, that is the bourgeois, and those who must sell their labor to survive, that is the proletariat. The base or substructure of society refers to this economic system, and upon this base rests the superstructure, that is the political, legal, and the ideological institutions. All these arise from and reinforce the economic system. So the base or substructure of society refers to this economic system, and upon this base rests the substructure, the political, legal, and ideological institutions that arise from and reinforce the economic system. As the mode of production evolves, the superstructure also changes to reflect the needs and interests of the ruling class. Marx argued that every economic system, for example feudalism, capitalism, etc., contains the seeds of its own destruction. For example, under capitalism, the exploitation of workers leads to increasing inequality, which creates the conditions for revolution. The changing relations between the production forces, such as technological advancements, and production relations, that is, the social and economic structures in place, push the society towards transformation. In Marx's view, social classes are defined not by abstract categories like religion or nationality, but by their relationship to the mode of production. The proletariat owns only their labor power, while the bourgeois owns the means of production. Classes are not static but evolve over time. As production relations change, new classes emerge. For example, the rise of industrialization in the 19th century created a large urban working class, that is the proletariat class, that was distinct from the traditional peasant class in pre-industrial society. The dialectical process describes how contradictions in society lead to the transformation of social relations. For example, or for instance, we see the conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat will eventually lead to a revolution where the proletariat overthrows the capitalist system and establishes a socialist society according to Marx. So the factory in capitalist society becomes the focal point of the contradiction between the two classes, that is the exploiters and the exploited. Marx and Engels refer to this conflict in terms of historical struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, and guild master and journeyman. So, Marx and Engels, they refer to the conflicts in historical struggles between all these, freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, all this. So, these historical relations are rooted in the oppressor and oppressed dynamics. In capitalist society, the exploiters accumulates wealth by extracting surplus value from the labor of the proletariat. So Marx believed that the exploitation of the working class is the source of all social conflict and historical development. In other words, the contradiction between the class of exploiters and the class of exploited workers shapes the trajectory of history. Marx's theory of class conflicts holds that as long as society remains divided into exploiter and exploited classes, this fundamental contradiction will continue to drive historical progress. As the tensions between the classes build up, they can result in revolutionary movements where the oppressed class rises to overthrow the existing system. Marx uses the distinction between we and us to explain the nature of class consciousness. The we represents a psychological concept where people, even though they may have shared interests, are not yet united. For instance, in a capitalist society, workers may be facing similar conditions, but they do not yet recognize their collective power or develop solidarity. In contrast, us refers to a group of oppressed people who come together with a common goal to overthrow the oppressors. In the case of the working class, this happens when workers become aware of their shared oppression and unite to challenge the capitalist system. So, class in itself, according to Marx, refers to a situation where people belong to a particular social class but not yet developed a collective awareness of their common interest. And class for itself occurs when workers recognize their shared oppressions and unite to fight for their rights, leading to class consciousness. And this class consciousness allows workers to see their collective struggle as part of a broader historical movement, ultimately resulting in revolution. So, the distinction between we, which Marx termed as class in itself, and the distinction and the us, which Marx stated as class for itself. So, within class in itself, the people are in the same situation, but they do not unite. They do not unite to have a revolution, but within class for itself, that is us, within this group, they share their common interest and they fight for their rights together. So Marx argued that a class is born when individuals internalize their common interest and develop the understanding that their exploitation is a systematic issue that needs to be addressed through collective actions. While economic deprivation plays a crucial role in leading to class conflicts and revolution, political ideology is also an important factor. The ruling class creates an ideology that justifies their position in society. This ideology often presents the capitalist system as natural, fair, and beneficial for all. However, the working class develops its own counter-ideology which challenges the dominant ideas of the capitalist class and seeks to overthrow the existing system. The clash of ideologies between the bourgeois and proletariat is central to revolution. The dominant capitalist ideology promotes individualism, private property, and competition, whereas the ideology of the working class advocates for solidarity, equality, and collective ownership. Marx believed that the competitive nature of capitalism, where individual producers act in self-interest, separates people and prevents class solidarity among the capitalists. In contrast, the workers are more likely to unite in a common struggle because their collective interest lies in improving their conditions and overthrowing the capitalist system. So, Marx's ideas continue to resonate in societies where inequality and class divisions persist. His analysis of capitalism's contradictions and the revolutionary potential of the working class has inspired movements for social change and liberation. Marx's radical critique of capitalism remains a powerful tool for understanding and challenging the injustices that arise from economic exploitation and class oppression. Marx has devoted his life to educate the working class about their plight and helping them understand that their conditions are not inevitable. By making the working class aware of its collective power, he hoped to foster a revolution that would bring about a more just and equal society. Now let us discuss the forms of class struggle. So in Marxist theory, class struggle is understood as a multidimensional phenomena that manifests in different forms depending on the arena of society in which it takes place. These forms are typically categorized into economic, political, and philosophical class struggles. Each of these forms plays a crucial role in the dynamics of class conflict and in the development of the relationship between the proletariat and the bourgeois class. So, here's a detailed discussion on these different classes. The first is economic class struggle. Economic class struggle is the most fundamental and direct form of class conflict. It revolves around the control and distribution of wealth and the conditions under which labor is performed. It emerges out of the relationship between the owners of the means of production, that is the bourgeois, and the workers who sell their labor power, that is the proletariat. To take an example, a labor union organizing a strike to demand better wages or safer working conditions is engaging in economic class struggle. The bourgeois, as the owners of capital, will seek to resist these demands in order to maintain profits, often using tactics such as hiring strike breakers or lobbying for legal restrictions on strikes. The second form of class struggle is political class struggle. Political class struggle refers to the contest for political power and control over the state apparatus. This form of class struggle arises out of the fact that the ruling class, that is the bourgeois, not only controls the economy but also dominates the political system, using it to perpetuate its economic interests. So the working class, through political struggle, seeks to challenge the political institutions that uphold the capitalist order. To take an example, the Russian Revolution of 1917 is a key example of political class struggle where the Bolshevik party representing the proletariat led an insurrection that overthrew the bourgeois government and established a socialist society. This represented the culmination of political class struggle, though its outcome was shaped by both ideological and economic factors. The third form of class struggle is philosophical class struggle. Philosophical class struggle refers to the ideological and cultural struggle between the dominant ideas that serve the interest of the ruling class and the counter ideas that emerge from the oppressed classes. For Marx, ideas and beliefs are not neutral but are deeply connected to the material conditions of society. The ruling class controls the dominant ideologies which it uses to justify its position of power and the inequalities inherent in the system. The working class, in turn, develops counter-ideologies that challenge the prevailing worldview. So to take an example of philosophical class struggle, it can be seen in the development of Marxist theory itself, which sought to refute bourgeois economic theories and offer an alternative vision of society based on the collective ownership of the means of production. Another example is the intellectual resistance to colonialism and imperialism, which were justified by ideologies of racial superiority and capitalist expansion. So in Marxist thought, all forms of class struggle are seen as interconnected and are part of the broader process of revolutionary change. Economic struggles push the working class to confront the political struggles that maintain capitalist domination, while philosophical struggles provide the necessary ideological tools to understand and critique the system and criticize the system. When these forms of struggle converge, they can potentially lead to a revolutionary transformation of society. So, this is all for today's video. So, here we have discussed today about the class struggle in Marxism and what are the different forms of class struggle Marx has depicted. Hope you all have understood. Thank you for today.